Levi was raised in a rough household. One day during his childhood years, his mother rushed into his room to hide from his alcoholic father. However, she was unable to keep him out, and Levi had to choose between confronting his father or praying for the gods to help. Whatever he chose that day, his mother died, and his father drank himself into ruin. He was taken to the orphanage, but there, his life didn't get better at all. The orphanage treated children horribly, and kids used to disappear without a trace. The truth is that the higher ups of the orphanage were using kids for rituals of the occult. Levi wanted to escape from that place as soon as he could, and he did escape, but fate had another tragic turn of events planned for him. Levi was enlisted to fight in the Second Great War in the name of the Eastern Union. He proved his skills and had his own squad of child soldiers, which were just as disposable as himself. One day, they were sent on a suicide mission, but Levi survived. From the trauma of the event, Levi developed a substance addiction to cope with the pain. He was unable to keep up with the guilt no longer and deserted the army. Now, he has to pack his things and leave Prehevel to start anew, if he can survive the Festival of Termina, that is. His Moonscorch is Weeping Scope. Its head is a sniper rifle barrel, and according to teasers from the upcoming update, we know Levi was a marksman in the army, so this form is how Levi feels inside, what he was reduced into, which is a living weapon. The lack of clothes and genitals could be there to further drive the point of how much the war has stolen from him, as he no longer bears the desire, or is even capable of, developing an intimate relationship with another. He shoots at anyone that tries to approach, and runs away as soon as anyone gets close. If we chase him down, we find him crying at the orphanage, but he will not attack anyone unless he's attacked first. Despite his monstrous appearance, he's more afraid of us than we are of him. Weeping Scope is, in his own eyes, just a tool to kill others, lacking the rights to be anything else. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Shadow the Axolotl, and I can tell you why people go insane. I can show you how you could do the same. I can tell you why the end will never come. I can tell you I'm the shadow on the sun. This is the actual intro for the video, and as much as I'd like to go back to the Moonscorching, I really do need to include a preface here, and I would appreciate if you listen to the end. This video is a semi-follow-up to the rare video I made a while ago, and let me answer the question you might be asking yourself right now. Do I need to watch it? And the answer is no. I would strongly recommend you watch it before this though, but in case you didn't, I'll quickly summarize what is essential for today's video in just a moment. But have in mind that you won't be getting the full picture without watching the rare video, as I won't be repeating myself with everything I said there. So if you want the actual in-depth lore and mechanics of Moonscorching, you should consider watching it. As for in this video, we will be only breaking down and analyzing each Moonscorch contestant transformation. So as a recap for those who watched the previous video and as introduction for everyone who's new here, Moonscorching is the blessing of the moon god of fear and hunger. It physically manifests the inner shadow of the subject, which is the repressed aspects of the unconscious mind. There are 14 characters in Fear Hunger 2, and 12 of them get a unique Moonscorch transformation. In this video, we will try to break down every one of those and analyze how it reflects the character's psyche, just as we did with Levi at the beginning. To fully understand a character's Moonscorch, we also need to explore their lore. So each analysis will be divided into explaining their background, followed by breaking down their Moonscorch transformation. I started with Levi because I think his Moonscorch is the easiest one to analyze, and as we proceed, the transformations will get gradually more complex to understand and require more speculation on our part. I also need to emphasize here that we will be analyzing art, which is by itself subjective and not perfect. We barely get any explanation to what each transformation means at all, so we are rather forced to make our own interpretations based on the hints we get. And still, in the end, we have no definite answers, no matter how interesting our theories turn out to be, as they are, well, still just theories. This video is my best shot at trying to puzzle out what the original intents of the creator of the game are, but I can't know that for sure, and you might disagree with me in some occasions, and well, feel free to do so. I'm pretty confident of my conclusions today, as I have the idea of this video cooking in the back of my mind for a long time now, and I also have discussed these ideas with many people who are also very knowledgeable of the lore of the game. But again, I'm not perfect, and I still might be getting a few things wrong. If there's anything you disagree with or think I missed, I invite you to comment down below so we all can have a discussion about it. Furthermore, as we will be deep diving into the characters' traumas, some moments of this video might be sensitive for some viewers, so viewer discretion is advised. Since this is a Fear and Hunger video, it usually goes without saying. But while I will try to be sensible about all of this, we are still going to address sensitive topics today, so please don't force yourself to watch this if it makes you uncomfortable. Thank you for listening to all of this rambling. Just one last thing. Stick all the way to the end for a special surprise about each Moonscorch, and something about the channel as well. I won't say anything else, but you won't want to miss it. Okay, let's continue. Caligura is a ruthless and despicable mobster from the Vatican City. Not much is known about his past, but from interactions with him during the festival, we can paint the picture of what type of person he is. He attacks Levi for no reason whatsoever, saying that he's doing the world a favor by getting rid of him. He picks up a fight with Henryk and kills him if we don't interfere. He attacks Marcoh while he sleeps and interrogates him, and he even tries to assault Abella. This guy is truly the worst of the worst, and his Moonscorch is the perfect representation of this fact. Monster is a disgusting mass of flesh in the shape of a ball sack, and that's it. He is ugly, crass, and disgusting. I guess it makes my job easier in the sense that the transformation speaks for itself. Well, one thing I might add to this is how Caligura tries to portray himself as dignified and elegant, despite being a mobster, but this gross, scrotal man is who he truly is underneath all the pretense. If I'm being honest, from all the Moonscorches, I think this is the one that changes someone the least. Marcoh and his sister lost their parents at an early age, and Marcoh had to find a way to make a living at just 10 years old. The streets of Vatican City are cold and merciless, and Marcoh learned that quickly. But, for better or for worse, Marcoh learned he could fend off his tormentors in the persistent street fights that he found himself in. His fame spread amongst gangs, and many tried to recruit him, but the same gangs had stolen Marcoh's hard-earned money too many times for him to want to do the same to someone else. However, this only got him in further trouble, and the street fights became almost a daily occurrence. At some point, Marcoh was doing more fighting than working, which led him to consider turning it into a living. In no time, he started fighting in underground boxing rings, where there was more money involved. While Marcoh was still busy in the ring, his sister grew up into a beautiful young woman and attracted many admirers. Despite Marcoh's attempts to keep her from getting out with any fishy people, she started getting close with a mobster known as Ricardo Accardo, the heir of the Accardo Mafia, who also had ties with the church running the country. But in Marcoh's eyes, despite being a mobster, Ricardo was decent enough. He had a flirtatious way of speech and got along with everyone. He even tried to recruit Marcoh a few times, which he politely declined. This was the first sign Marcoh should have picked on that it was not a good idea to trust him. Ricardo set up Marcoh with a professional boxing trainer and greater matches. Before he realized, Marcoh was spending way too much time with the Accardo family. He was dragged into the criminal world before he realized. When Ricardo finally showed his true colors, it was too late. Marcoh was set up to fight and kill a deserter of the Accardo family, and if he refused, his sister would be the one to pay for it. Marcoh managed to knock out the man, but then he saw Ricardo smiling in the crowd. He hit the man again, and again, and again, and again, and the referee stopped Marcoh, but it was too late, and it was only the beginning. Marcoh was forced to keep working for the Accardo family, and his sister's well-being was the final leverage. This madness has to stop, Marcoh thought. Ricardo could feel Marcoh's killing intent. That is why he made sure to never meet him alone. But at the same time, he was too cocky to consider him a serious threat. One day, Marcoh met Ricardo in a club, surrounded by his goons, of course. This didn't stop Marcoh, who punched him, grabbed him by his throat, slammed his head on the floor until he stopped moving, and finally threw him through the railing. Ricardo Accardo was no more once his head hit the center of the club's first floor, but Marcoh still had to fight his way through a wave of goons before escaping the club, which he did miraculously without receiving any serious injuries. Marcoh finally managed to get in contact with his sister and explain the situation to her. She was in the Accardo's summer villa at the time, located in the country of Ireland. With both the mafia and the law enforcement after him, there was no hope for them to stay at the Vatican City. After the two of them agreed to meet up in the country of Rondon, Marcoh took the first train leaving the country. The destination was the capital city of Bohemia, the obscure city of Prehevil. Giant is a big, brutish Hulk. If we try to talk to him, he screams, "Guilt! Guilt!" Which makes our job to analyze our Moonscorch way easier. Giant is the manifestation of Marcoh's guilt of killing, the inner perception of his own self as a violent monster created to hurt others. The weird-shaped person he's grabbing with his right hand symbolizes Ricardo, as he is grabbing him by the throat. But the shape of the hand suggests that Giant cannot let go of the being, even if he wanted to. To me, this could symbolize Marcoh's idea that he cannot escape the cycle of violence, that he cannot stop himself from hurting those around him. This imagery gets more tragic when you realize that Marcoh is the opposite of all of this. He shows great care for Olivia, who can't walk, going to the dangerous center of Prehevil to look for a wheelchair for her. He helps Tanaka build confidence by giving him boxing lessons. He even imitates frogs. This guy's the definition of sweet, honestly. Even when he turns into Giant, if you try to persuade and ask him to not hurt you, he recollects himself for a moment and stops attacking you for a while. Marcoh bears a gentle nature, which, due to his life of violence, only serves to bring him even more feelings of shame and guilt. Marcoh might try to make things right, but the weight of his sins still remains. Such is the nature of our shadow. Olivia was born alongside her twin sister Rayla at the stroke of midnight of the turning of the year. Olivia is the older twin, born 31st of December, and Rayla is the youngest, born 1st of January. As a result of this unusual occurrence, the sisters were born with different birth signs. It was evident since that moment that the two of them would live very different lives. Olivia was born with a weak build. She spent most of her time indoors, reading books. Rayla, on the other hand, was adventurous and social, always making friends wherever she went. The two girls were raised in a strict religious household, and they found solace in each other's company. Despite their differences, they shared a strong bond. When Olivia was 15 years old, a disaster struck her life. She experienced multiple strokes that left her bedridden. Her parents sought religious healers for aid, but nothing came out of it. Rayla pleaded for her parents to get professional help, but when they did, it was already too late. Olivia was diagnosed with vascular myelopathy around her spinal cord. Despite going through numerous operations trying to undo the issue, Olivia was, at least in her own eyes, sentenced to a life bound by a wheelchair. Tragedy lies in the fact that such outcome was avoidable if proper treatment was provided sooner. But thinking about such things leads to nowhere, so Olivia suppressed those thoughts and buried them deep into her unconscious. Later in life, Olivia and Rayla both enrolled in a university in Bremen. Their apparent differences kept being a common trait in their lives, even when they finally escaped the strict control of their parents. Olivia would take natural sciences classes, and her sister Rayla would study computer sciences and engineering. While Olivia still struggled to connect with her peers, Rayla would become the leader of the student council. Both were atop of their respective classes, but Rayla would once again outshine Olivia when she was invited to participate in a student exchange program between Bremen and the Eastern Union. Rayla kept contact with Olivia. She sent letters about her work, all the incredible things she's achieving, and all the incredible places she's going, which only fueled Olivia's jealousy. Even after graduating and starting her own botanist research in Bremen's largest greenhouse, she still felt as if she was living in the shadow of her own sister. But despite it all, Olivia was genuinely happy for her sister. One day, the letters came to a halt all of a sudden. She didn't hear from her sister in months, until her parents were informed that their daughter was accused of treason against the Bremen Empire. Next time Olivia read from her sister was in the news. She was freed by a terrorist organization known as the Nameless Liberty Underground. Olivia recalled a conversation Rayla had with her professor mentioning them. When she decided to investigate, she learned the professor was executed several months prior. But when investigating his office, she found letters mentioning a certain operation happening in the city of Prehevel. Upon learning this, Olivia headed to Prehevel without delay to get answers, and most importantly, to find her sister. Alright, now that we are done with the backstory, let me just say this. Olivia is evil, bro. Sorry to break it to the two Olivia fans watching this right now. She's a professional gaslighter. If you talk with her in the Church of Almer, she will literally say, with a straight face, that she didn't have a religious upbringing. Like, what? Aren't your religious parents responsible for the wheelchair you're in right now? She kept her mouth shut the entire festival about the fact that her sister that she's looking for appeared in everyone's dreams. She doesn't say anything about the project happening in the city, how it could be connected with the weird monsters and the festival happening. She doesn't speak about the NLU. She doesn't say anything useful. She will only either A, complain, or B, say something just to remember everyone she's supposed to be a botanist. You know, when you recruit Olivia as a party member, she only has the skill photosynthesis, which is her worst skill. But if you fight her, well, suddenly she remembers how to use her OP poisons. She's even gatekeeping her own skills. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just joking. That was probably just a mirror forgot moment. In all seriousness, let's talk about her Moonscorch. I want to start by pointing out something interesting about that Moonscorch. When you ask what happened to her, she replies saying that she has always been like this. Let's dissect that. The form of mechanical dance is of a disfigured humanoid machine. Olivia and her wheelchair became inseparable in symbiosis, but the vent system part of the machine leads me to think it's meant to represent a more specific moment in her life when she was bedridden and subject to a series of operations, where both religious healers and real doctors were toying with her, trying to fix the issue. In Olivia's mind, that's who she is, an abomination half person, half machine, that is bound to be toyed by others. The fact that she says she has always been like this means the wheelchair isn't the only thing affecting her. It reveals to us that she feels as if she was cursed from birth, always destined to live in the shadow of her sister's accomplishments. As harsh as it is to say this, mechanical dance is a hell of Olivia's own making. I'm definitely not saying she's responsible for her disability in any way. Please don't take it that way. But what I'm saying is that it only haunted her so much because she tortured herself in her own mind. She was never honest about her inferiority complex towards her sister, who, in case she decided to open up to, would be compassionate and help her through it. She was the one who perceived herself as a liability due to her condition and tried to compensate in any way she could, only to never be able to surpass her own sister. All I can say to this might sound really cliche, but unless you want to make yourself miserable on purpose, don't let your happiness be defined in comparing your success with someone else's. Envy corrodes you, makes you weak. Every victory of the one you're comparing yourself to becomes a loss to you, which becomes even more painful when you're putting yourself against someone you love. You know, one thing that sticks out to me is how not even once in her backstory there's any direct mentioning of someone other than Olivia herself comparing her to Rayla. I will end up at that and leave it as food for thought. Okay, Osa. To put it simply, his backstory is huge. Huge! It's so over the top that it has an abridged and a full version. Even the abridged version is so large that you're watching me press the fast forward button and this thing just keeps going. Just so you have any idea of how massive the full length version is, you can even die in that thing. You can die in the freaking prologue. So, to spare ourselves of that, I will summarize what we need for his Moonscorch, which, despite his huge backstory, is quite straightforward. Okay, to sum it up, Osa was born in the borders of the continent of Abyssinia. His country had a long story of conflicts and disputes. He grew up thinking everyone around him was stupid, but the people of the north were no better in his view. The Second Great War started affecting Abyssinia, and Osa knew it was a matter of time before he was drafted. Not wanting to die in someone else's war, he left his family and went to Amon, the city of the sun, to educate himself in spiritualism and religion. During his time in Amon, Osa thought he was better than everyone else and planned to just use the religious chiefs to get knowledge he sought and leave them behind after they were no longer needed. Religion was stupid as well in his own view, so he wasn't interested in following traditions. During his time in the temple, he found a scroll about a sect of magical practitioners known as the Yellow Mages. Yellow Mages were different from typical priests in the sense that instead of worshipping the deities, they harnessed their power for their own personal gain. Interested in their ideology, Osa left Abyssinia and headed for the Eastern Sanctuaries, the country of origin of the Yellow Mages. In the Eastern Sanctuaries, Osa thought that everyone was an idiot, but he eventually was approached by a group of surviving Yellow Mages that traveled the world. The remaining Yellow Mages of the age were separated into small traveling groups, and one of them saw potential in Osa. During his many travels, he met a man known as Hadil Asif, a Yellow Mage of a known occultist family. He spoke about a malign dungeon in the country of Rondon and its horror stories. Originally, Osa dismissed Hadil Asif's stories because he thought the old wizard was an idiot. But not too long after hearing about the dungeons, he started having rough nightmares with the place, as if there was something there calling for him. So, he and a group of Yellow Mages made the trip, in which everyone died from natural and unnatural causes, including Asif himself, except for Osa. When he got to his destination, he received the Fear and Hunger treatment, great game by the way, you should play it, and met Nasura, previously a servant head, now a burned servant head. Nasura was buried amidst a bunch of rubble somewhere inside the dungeon. Nasura was the one calling for Osa to the dungeon, and there they made an agreement. Osa would take Nasura to Prehevel in order to kill Kaiser, as Nasura really wants to take revenge on Legard for some reason, and in turn, Nasura would teach him the secrets of the occult, as he is the very founder of the Yellow Mages. So, even though Osa thinks Nasura is stupid, he accepts to be his pupil and has to get called a filthy maggot on a daily basis because, he really needs the knowledge. And so, Osa heads to Prehevel and finds himself involved with the festival of Termina. Appearance-wise, Mastermind is Osa with a weird fungus growing on his head, This is a reference to an enemy from Fiend Hunger 1, the Mumbler. Mumblers are creatures who were enslaved by the god of depths and became its servants. The idea of becoming a slave to a higher power is precisely what the idea behind Osa's Moonscorch is. It represents his fear of losing control. His fear of losing control is the reason for Osa's constant necessity to feel intellectually superior to others. Osa plays himself as someone above moral and mundane concerns. He seeks enlightenment to be free from the shackles of the common life, which, in his own eyes, does not befit him. But in truth, Osa is constantly letting himself be used by others, be it by the priests in the city of Amon, by the Yellow Mages, and, worst of all, by Nasra himself. Osa spent his entire life working for someone else's plans, thinking he was in control all the time, and that he was doing it just to take advantage of them, believing that he was in fact the grand mastermind. But his Moonscorch says otherwise. Osa is just a normal guy, slightly above average when it comes to brains, but that aside, nothing really special about him. The difference being only that he's constantly letting others control him while acting high and mighty himself. The floating eye in his hand is supposed to be the third eye, a common symbol of enlightenment, but with Mastermind it takes an ironical twist. If you try to talk with him, all that you get as answer are mumbles, meaning that even if he finally achieved any sort of breakthrough discovery and enlightenment, he can't even share or make use of it. It is all pointless. So what do we take out of this? Don't be a smartass. I could go on, but I think you get the gist. Henryk begins to tell us about his past from the moment he started as a chef in his family's business, a tavern called Klinkov in the Kingdom of Rondon. He used to help preparing the meals, but he eventually decided to leave the family business. Henryk wanted to make something out of himself, be it as a musician, a painter, or an actor. Henryk experienced failure after failure and never managed to achieve the results he was hoping for. After running out of money and giving up on his plans after facing so many rejections, he returned to his family business as a chef. To the surprise of Henryk, he had a knack for the culinary arts and refined his skills to the point of making Klinkov a famous place to eat. Even newspaper articles were written about it. Henryk, with his newfound talent, began traveling around the world in search of inspiration for his craft, which eventually led him to Prehevel, where his life would suddenly change forever. When you first meet Gentleman, he invites you to dinner and starts asking you questions. If you pick your answers correctly, you can deal with this encounter entirely without getting into a fight. If you pick the right answers, that is. Gentleman politely shows up his refined selection of cooking recipes, but if you say something to offend him, well, get ready for a fight. Gentleman is quite the oddball when it comes to the Moonscorches. He appears to be very rational and speaks in a polite manner, but then again he declares himself to be the mayor of Prehevel, which, he isn't? Henryk is not from Prehevel. He's not even from Bohemia. There were no elections happening, so he could not possibly be the mayor. But this is the perfect starting point to understand what is Gentleman all about. We know how in general Moonscorch forms are a reflection of the worst inside each contestant, and the Gentleman is not an exception. Although he appears friendly, he is prone to anger. His ego is extremely fragile, and he can snap at any moment. Gentleman will try his hardest to appear formal and refined despite his monstrous appearance. He says he wants to talk about poetry, music, culinary arts, but will offer genitalia on a plate and act arrogant. He will desperately seek approval, though, an extreme version of Henryk's need for validation, and that's the overall character of the Gentleman. He's someone that wants to appear important, refined, and sophisticated, and yet he's a simple, arrogant, and even perverted man. The fact that he blatantly puts himself in the position of mayor of Prehevel is a display of the fiddling nature of his ego. He needs to be someone important, otherwise, he cracks. When you mention family with him, he gets somber and rushes to change the subject. This alone tells us that Henryk did not have a great relationship with his parents after all. Maybe they didn't approve of his attempts at being an artist, or maybe they simply didn't acknowledge Henryk the way he wanted to. The way he seeks approval for his cooking could be explained as a substitution for the lack of approval he received from his parents. Don't look at me like that, I told you this video would get real. Anyways, that is Gentleman in a nutshell. If I were to add anything to this, is that his head kind of looks like a bunny mask. And I hope you know what bunny masks imply. But we can't be sure of anything until we get more info on his backstory. Karin was always a curious child. Getting herself in trouble was a regular occurrence that her elder siblings and her nanny kept trying to prevent to the best of their abilities. She was born in the Zauer family. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. A family that rose to aristocracy by their own merits, which meant that despite Karin's parents being very respected, the Zauer family name was the first one to arise whenever the Bremen aristocracy overstepped their boundaries and they needed to offer something to appease the public opinion. Things started to get out of hand when riots broke out and suddenly a mob was after the Zauers. Karin was taken by her nursemaid Dalia to the capital of the eastern sanctuaries, Jataya, to stay there until the situation calmed down. But Karin's intuition was a sharp one, and she realized that, in fact, Dalia had kidnapped her. She tried to escape, but it was useless. Dalia was not putting Karin in danger in any case. Getting in trouble is something that Karin does by herself. The cultural shock made Karin realize the structures of power and oppression in society, and she became involved with civil rights organizations. In one of the protests she was in as a teenager, she was targeted by the officers. Karin was knocked unconscious and woke up in the hospital. A Bremen embassy heard the news. Karin explained to them what happened, and they took her in their custody. Karin's intuition was proved to be right. She was indeed kidnapped by Dalia and was living with the ransom money her family sent her. Upon returning to Bremen, she learned that her father died during the unrest, and she never heard from Dalia again. She kept her streak of activism and joined the newsletter Midnight Gazette as a journalist. During her time as a journalist, she learned conspiracy theories about the secret society known as the New Gods, and how they pulled the strings of the Second Great War. She was especially interested in the figure of Kaiser and wrote articles denouncing his actions. Eventually, she learned that the objective of Bremen in the war was to seize control of Prehevel. Her intuition once again was telling her something was about to happen there, and so, as soon as the war ended, she headed for the city in search of answers. Okay, so what exactly is Valkyrie supposed to be about? Let's take a closer look and see what conclusions we can take from it. Let's begin with the name, Valkyrie. In Norse mythology, Valkyries are female warriors who are to choose fallen warriors to go to Valhalla, the Norse afterlife. The root of the word Valkyrie is from the Old Norse word Valkyria, which means chooser of the slain. But instead of the valiant and noble figure of the Norse Valkyries, Karin's Moonscorch looks much more like a vulture, which is precisely the core idea of her transformation. Valkyrie is associated with the guilt Karin feels as a war journalist. For bad or for worse, her job is to make profit from wars, which means that Karin is making money off the souls of the fallen soldiers fighting in those wars. A guilt that Karin rationalizes by seeing herself as honoring their deaths, using their sacrifice as a way to reveal the truth to society and prevent more deaths from happening. You know, I told you with Gentlemen that the general rule is that the Moonscorches are to reveal what's there of worst inside each contestant, but Valkyrie is one of the exceptions. You know and I know that war journalism is an unfortunate business, but it's a necessary one. That is through honest journalism that we can be informed of the exploitation and corruption of power that usually comes along with wars. But at some point, a journalist can get too used to the brutality and lose the touch with the reality of the situation. But that doesn't seem to be Karin's case at all. Even though she knows that what she does is for the best, she can't shake the feeling that there is something inherently wrong with it. For someone harsh and disagreeable like her, this is surprisingly thoughtful. Karin fans, you get a green flag. So what about those creatures she's carrying in her back? These are Bohemian soldiers that were fighting in Prehevel. We know from the description of the spear they drop. She's carrying them to a place which the name translates to Devil's Island, which I don't know if it's relevant, but it's a small piece of land in the shore of Prehevel. It seems to symbolize the act of Valkyrie taking the souls of the fallen to Valhalla. We are done with Valkyrie, and her is the last one of the easier analysis, in my opinion. From now on things are to get more complex and speculative, but I say, bring it on. Tanaka was born in the Far East, in the land of Edo. He was an earnest, hard-working employee of his father's business, and was elected as ambassador after the Second Great War ended and the borders of Edo reopened. Tanaka traveled far to the west in order to make connections and further expand his father's business. One of the meetings was organized to happen in the city of Prehevel, and well, that's how he got himself in the mess of the Festival of Termina. Okay, pretty straightforward background with this one, which means that if you want to comprehend what is the visual storytelling behind Judgement, we need to direct our gaze towards Tanaka's personality and his interactions. Like previously stated, Tanaka is an earnest white-collar worker. The Japanese salarymen are clearly the inspiration in this case here because, for all the intents and purposes, Edo is the Finhanger equivalent to Japan. So with that in mind, what exactly is a salaryman? To put it simply, they are a cultural icon that embodies characteristics of Japanese work culture. Salarymen are expected to endure long and many times unpaid hours and fully devote themselves for the company they're in. The reward of that effort is a stable job and a career path that they can look forward to. Sometimes. Now, I'm not making a social critique of Japanese work culture here because, well, first, I'm not Japanese, and second, I'm pretty dumb and uneducated on the topic, but it's clear to me that the character of Tanaka and Judgement, for that matter, are talking about the inherent issues with that. So, how do we begin? Well, the whip might be a good start. The blood coating Judgment's body implies that the whip is not only for his enemies, but also for himself. The act of self-flagellation is a practice used in some ancient beliefs as a way of penitence. If you punish yourself, you are paying for your sins. This doesn't seem to be the case here, considering that the religious symbolism is never mentioned in Tanaka's character, and I also doubt that Myro would choose Edo to convey a commonly associated Christian imagery. So, what is it then? Simply put, it symbolizes the intense work ethic Tanaka lived through, as well as his own mentality shaped by such environment. Let's take a look at Judgment's dialogues. Morning waits no one, morning has gold in store, in its mouth. The grind never stops. Then, if you ask him what he's talking about, work it, harder, faster, so you get stronger. Wait a second, I just noticed this. Is that a freaking Daft Punk reference? Oh, come on. Anyway, the world doesn't wait still as the weak loiter around. If you tell him there's more to life than work, Judgement says, if it helps you sleep at night, you can keep convincing yourself of that. But don't sleep late. The morning glimmers of gold. The grind never stops. The whip is a physical manifestation of that idea that you must work harder and harder in order to achieve your dreams. What dreams, one may ask? Well, we can decide on that later. For now, get back to work. Still on the topic, I want to say something that might be a stretch, so I'm either crazy or I'm a genius. But take a look at his shoes. Don't they look like horse hoofs? The imagery of a workhorse here might be aligned with the idea of a salaryman that doesn't stop working. Don't tell me you can't see it. There are other elements to design we still have to address, such as the glass in his body and the collar on his neck. As for the color, it vaguely reminds me of something out of Silent Hill, but unfortunately I'm not able to discern if it's a reference to something specific or just a general connection. But it certainly speaks to the white collar worker aspect of Tanaka, emphasis on the color and less on the white. Postscript shadow here. I swear it wasn't a racial joke. I swear it wasn't a racial joke. The color that's not white. That's what I meant. Oh my god. Like some sort of dog cone to keep him boxed in that company, in that work ethic. And then we have the glass. As for that, Judgement has a dialogue speaking of it. This place, it has awakened something in me. What you see on the outside is but a fraction of the change I've gone through. I've gone through the glass ceiling that might once have hindered me. Can you see me now, Father? Climbing the corporate ladder is an expression symbolizing ascending the internal hierarchy of the company you work in, which makes sense as a symbolism here because in many companies, the higher the floor of your workspace, the higher is your rank. The glass shards in Judgment's head symbolizes this idea that he has gone through the ceiling, escaping the corporate hierarchy altogether, which can be interpreted as Tanaka being no longer restrained by the salaryman way of life. He's gone beyond it, ascended past it. Remember in the psychoanalysis class when I said that the shadow also has the latent talents someone failed to realize? The shadow also contains our latent talents that we might have ignored our whole life. I think Tanaka with his latent soul is the perfect example of that. Tanaka is the character with the most opportunities to die in the game. But if he somehow survives, we see him developing a bond with Marcoh and doing some boxing training sessions. If we fight Tanaka before his character development arc and after it, we notice that headband Tanaka is actually stronger. Mentally, Tanaka becomes much more resilient as well. He speaks about avenging Marcoh if he turns into giant and bringing Perkele down, all by himself. So Judgement represents Tanaka growing past his need to prove himself to others, to the company he works for and to his father who's constantly judging him. Speaking of judging, the name Judgement is most likely a reference to the tarot card of the same name. I don't think it's that hard to believe considering we have an NPC that reads the future with cards in the same game. So Judgement, the card, represents the moment you are to be judged for your actions. It is the moment you must grow past your previous self in order to achieve a higher state of consciousness. Judgement, the Moonscorch, is what I believe to be Tanaka failing to fully reach that higher state. He is still a slave, not to the company, not to his father, but to the idea that in order to attain happiness, you must struggle, you must work. Only difference being is that now Judgement only works for himself. Abella grew up in Odegaard when it was rebuilding itself in the aftermath of the First Great War. Despite that, she had a balanced childhood with her parents and siblings. When the Second Great War began, Abella was too young to help in the front lines, so she had to find another way to help the home front. By the way, this thing about Abella being too young to participate in the defense is wrong. She was 22 years old at the time of the Second Great War began. Here's a huge wall of text explaining how we can know that. Pause if you want to read it. Chronological inconsistencies aside, Abella had a knack for mechanics and electronics, so she invested in those fields in order to help in any way she could. It was Abella's nature as the eldest child to take care of those around her, and nothing frustrated her more than the feeling that she couldn't help more directly. But she was already too important as an engineer of the home front to become a soldier. Odegaard was in disarray as well, with the men dying in the battlefield. They needed someone to take care of the manual labor. Once again, she took the responsibility upon herself as she was born with a rather physically strong body. One day, when she was returning from a long day after work, she ran into a foreign man, bleeding from being shot in the belly. She learned that the man was from Rondon and also a member of a resistance organization known as the Nameless Liberty Underground, or NLU. The man had important documents that needed to be delivered to the Kingdom of Rondon, and since he couldn't do it, Abella took it upon herself. Abella soon became a member of the organization, and her expertise as an engineer came in handy. She learned that the Eastern Union was working on something evil and the Bremen Empire wanted to seize it, so she traveled to Prehevel to help the NLU and stop Kaiser. And that's how she got herself as a participant in the Festival of Termina. Chaugnar can be summarized with one phrase, like an elephant in a porcelain shop. This one is not obvious to decipher with just a glance, and I believe it will require me to get in trouble with the Abella fans for what I'm about to say, but someone has to do it, so might as well just be me. Chaugnar is a reflection of Abella's insecurity of being perceived as not feminine. Hear me out, hear me out. I know, and we know that Abella is the #1 girl boss of this game. She sees a problem and she goes there to fix it. No complaining, no questions asked. But if we are going to take a closer look at it, we can see what I'm talking about. Chaugnar's appearance is, with lacking a better word to call it, very masculine. Big, rough hands, broad shoulders, and a very muscular torso that, to top it off, is shirtless. The creature is wearing Abella's mechanic uniform, and we know how it's a physically demanding job, one that Abella had to take on in her home front, in the place of the men who were fighting in the battlefields. Using the skill medical diagnosis on the corpse of Chaugnar, we learned that the transformation started from the head, and an outside organism attached itself on the face of Abella. I would go so far as to say that this is what triggered the transformation. We know what this organism is, after all. Before the big reveal, there's something I want to discuss first. There's a particular scene with Abella that I want to show you. If we get in the tunnel entrance during the morning of day 1, we will meet with Abella and she will suggest to team up with us to explore. We can say no to that offer and she will go down the tunnel by herself. If we go after her down there, we startle her and she lets out a big scream. Shortly after, she will suggest to team up with us once again, and if we refuse, she will be disappointed. To me, the purpose of this scene is simple. It wants to let us know that despite Abella's calm demeanor, she is quite scared to go alone. In fact, she will turn into Chaugnar by day 1 afternoon if we don't recruit her, which is relatively quick considering she hadn't much time to lose her sanity with the madness of Prehevel. Now, here is the parasite that the diagnosis was talking about. This rather phallic parasite is in fact the woodsman's phallus. It can attach to a character if they fail the woodsman's coin flip attack. Now, picture this, alone and scared Abella, exploring the dark and dangerous bunker all by herself, when suddenly, this creature jumps on her face. She tries to take it off, but the parasite refuses to let go. She wanders around the bunker for a while and looks at her reflection. The insecurity she made sure to mask all her life begins to surface, and she can't cope with the idea of how shameful she looks. The madness of the moon takes an effect upon her altered mental state, and the Moonscorch transformation follows shortly after. This is my theory of what happened to Abella. One might think that she is overreacting, that she's conventionally attractive and doesn't need to worry about being perceived as feminine. But I think this goes to show that even the strongest of us have our own insecurities. That by framing someone as being invincible, we are failing to humanize their struggles, and in doing so, we risk isolating them from the compassion and understanding that they deserve. Marina was born in the Church of Almer in the city of Prehevel, and her father was the current leading Dark Priest. Prehevel is a city known for remaining loyal to the religious practices of old, contrary to the rest of the world that decided to move towards less strict and barbaric rituals with time. However, despite Prehevel being a rather polytheistic city, Domek, Marina's father, began to repress the worship of deities that were not the ascended god Almer, a trend that seems to be happening with the entire sect of dark priests, who once were followers and scholars of all deities, old and new. Despite that, different places of worship of different gods can be found around the city, but the worship of Almer is, at least in theory, the main one. The life of a dark priest was ruthless and bleak. One had no place for their self, as their life was solely devoted to the worship of the gods and to their rituals. It was tradition, a not so old one, in fact, that the eldest son would inherit the position of a dark priest. However, Marina's mother wanted to spare her from that life. So, despite being born a boy, when the time came, her mother told her father that he had a daughter. If Father Domek knew the truth or decided to ignore it is unclear at this point. However, he was displeased with not having a son to pass on his legacy. Marina was raised accordingly and was homeschooled at the churchyard, learning religion and occultism from an early age. Her talent would soon be recognized by the Ministry of Darkness in the Vatican City, and an international scholarship was offered to her. Marina took the opportunity without hesitation, as the idea of getting far away from her judgmental father and his disdain for her existence was appealing. In the Vatican, Marina chose to remain a woman. In her own eyes, it felt as something more natural, in any case. She kept refining her skills, and her time spent in Prehevel felt more and more like a distant past she wanted to forget. But fate had different plans for her. One day, she received a letter from her father telling of her mother's passing. The letter was cold and detached, and that rose a suspicion that maybe her father was responsible for this. Marina knew that her father was obsessed with blood magic, and she knew about rituals that demanded the sacrifice of a loved one. She had to face her past once again to get answers, so she packed her things and went back to Prehevel just when the festival of Termina was about to begin. Appearance-wise, Cocoon is Marina's body with extra limbs and in a spider-like position. From where was her head, now sprouts the cocoon figure that gives the transformation its name. Her now head sprouts from her groin, which is tied to the cocoon by a leash. To understand the symbolism behind that, her battle dialogue helps us. When we talk to her, she reluctantly tells us that we must die, and if we ask her who's telling her that, she says it's him. If we pressure her further and ask if she's talking about the thing on her back, she answers, "Father, please, please." With this information, we can conclude that Cocoon represents the influence of Marina's father that grips her life. One that even after spending so many years apart, she could not fully escape from, and one that now she carries on her back as a burden. The thing on Cocoon's back is not Marina's real father, but the judgmental father that lives in her unconscious, based off of him. There is so much symbolism here, so let me break down to you what I could find. Let's begin with the leash. It is supposed to represent Domek's control over Marina, as he is the one giving her orders. It's tied Marina's head that is in her groin with Domek's cocoon neck. The idea of a cocoon being Domek and it sprouting from where her head was is deep. Cocoons symbolize transformation. They are a stage where something evolves into something else. And the idea that Domek is the cocoon tying Marina down means that he is responsible for unleashing her potential. If we take a closer look, it is as if the Domek figure is breaking out of the cocoon. It means that while Marina's emotional dependence and subordination to her father's influence grows, it stunts her own. Marina's head sprouting from her groin is a tricky symbolism, but in my interpretation it represents the idea that Domek is not concerned with what Marina is as a person. He cares little about her beliefs, fears, talents, hopes, or aspirations. He is concerned only with what is between her legs, so to speak. This idea could be further emphasized with a dialogue that suggests that Marina knows that Domek knows she's trans, and she thinks this only serves to further amplify his disappointment for her. The extra limbs could add to that by being a metaphor of how she perceives herself as deformed in some way. It's heartbreaking, but it's not whole truth. I know we are supposed to be analyzing Marina here, but let me use this bit of space to analyze Domek as well, as I think now is a good opportunity. Now, first things off, he's truly a piece of shit, and I'm not trying to excuse him. Not only he treated Marina with contempt her entire life, that whole blood sacrifice ritual thing with Marina's mother was actually real. He indeed killed his own wife trying to reach mortality, not to mention the whole business with orphanage, which is another rabbit hole we don't have time to explore now. But it's possible to read between the lines of some of his actions that make him more than just a completely evil bastard. First, there is the letter he sent Marina. He knew about the festival of Termina, and I genuinely think he wanted to keep Marina out of that mess. As evidence, we have the scene where Samarie confronts Father Domek and kills him. I won't be playing it in full here today, and I will be explaining why Samarie did that in her own segment, but what we need from the scene is that the first time Domek mentions Marina in that conversation, he says that person died along his mother and their dirty little secret, confirming that Domek knew the truth. The second time he speaks of Marina, he tells Samarie he won't find her. Then he corrects himself and says she won't find him here. That's Myra's way of giving a wink that, oh, Domek acts transphobic, but that's just appearances. Deep down he sees Marina as a girl, guys. He's not transphobic, see? Which could not be more obvious than when Marina finally finds Domek bleeding on the floor after being stabbed, and he literally calls her a stupid girl for coming to Prehevel, and that he sent the letter to keep her away. The idea of Marina being disappointment in his eyes could probably be some sort of resentment Domek bears for himself. We know dark priests live a shitty life, so he was torn between exposing the truth and forcing Marina down that path, or letting her choose her own fate by keeping with the pretense. He probably saw it as unfair that nobody shielded him from the life of a dark priest, so he lashes out on Marina with the judgmental and cold act. I could be totally overanalyzing it, though. It's up to you to decide what you believe. In any case, I think concept-wise Cocoon is a solid 10 out of 10. It really tells a story of how much what really pushes us down are in the end just narratives that we tell ourselves, and that we need to break free from them in order to emerge as something new. Daan's parents were devoted followers of the goddess of creation, Sylvian, and Daan traveled with them all across Europa as they engaged in their bunny mask rituals. Daan resented his childhood, for his parents would often care more about their ritualistic practices than tend to his needs. The effects of the ritual would take its toll on the sanity of Daan's parents, and they even tried to pass down the gift of Sylvian onto him at some point. They spent longer and longer time in the meadows, until one day, they never returned. Daan was forced to fend for himself just at the age of 13, but his usage of healing magic of Sylvian directed him in the path of becoming the apprentice of Baron Einher von Dutch. Daan learned the taste of the finest perks of the high class as his butler, but as von Dutch was also a doctor, he would teach Daan modern medicinal practices in exchange for his knowledge of the occult. As time went on, Daan became an item with the Baron's daughter, Elise, and the couple had von Dutch's blessing despite their different origins. However, a few years later, a war was about to break out in Europa, and Daan was sent off to join the fight. He experienced the inhumane cruelty of it all, and the letters he received from home were the only thing keeping him going on, until one day, the letters stopped coming. As soon as the war ended, Daan rushed back home to know if everything was okay, only to find an abandoned manor once belonging to the Von Dutch. Daan couldn't find a single living soul inside. but he found that the way to the basement was open. When he arrived, he learned that the room was used for a dark ritual, and the corpse of Einhard von Dutch was found in the center. He died from what seemed to be self-inflicted wounds. Each corner of the room was filled with sacrificial gifts to a god unknown to Daan, and his heart sunk as he realized the main offering was Elise. In the time Daan spent away, the occult had completely devoured the mind of the Baron, and Daan was left helpless to what was his goal with all of this. All he knew was the sigil and documents mentioning the city of Prehavel. With nothing left to lose, Daan decided to leave for the mysterious city.
Oh, hello there. Ooh. Oh, hello there.
Now, I already have explored a lot of Pocketcat in my previous video on Rare. You may watch it if you want to learn more. So in order to not repeat myself here, I won't be going over the lore of Pocketcat itself, but rather why Daan turns into him. There is an ongoing debate if Pocketcat is actually a Moonscorch, or if it's just something else entirely, of which I think, although Pocketcat is different from your conventional Moonscorch, he is a Moonscorch nonetheless. So why Daan turns into Pocketcat? This is the central question that we need to answer, as there isn't much to say about his design. To understand why Daan turns into Pocketcat, we need to refer to his childhood. Daan was the son of two Sylvan cultists, bunny masks to be more precise. We know what bunny masks are, or rather, what they do. They spent their time away copulating as a ritual to worship the goddess Sylvan, as she is the goddess of sex and fertility. The really dark part about this is that in Daan's background, we are told that his parents tried to pass down the gift of healing of Sylvan onto him. The implications being that Daan, as a child, was forced to be part of these rituals. This left an immense scar in his psyche that he never fully healed from. During his transformation scene into Pocketcat, the previous Pocketcat, or the spirit of Pocketcats depending on how you see it, pries into the mind of Daan and reveals how that experience has isolated him. He felt he was a bystander, watching others living life under the sun. This metaphor of life under the sun is not accidental. It is a direct reference to the domain of the god of the sun, a god that I have explored extensively in this channel before, but assuming you don't know anything about it, what you need to know to this analysis is that he's the god of social norms. He's the idea that one must act in accord to society expectations, lest they will become an outcast, and the price for this is their own individuality. So, Pocketcat is basically saying that Daan spent his life masking his true nature, his true feelings, that deep down he's a dirty, degenerate furry, and I'm quoting Pocketcat on this. I have previously spoke before how Daan might share Pocketcat's thing for children. While that could still be the case, there is also evidence suggesting otherwise. It could be that what Daan shares with Pocketcat is just the general sexually deviant behavior and the murderous nature. To support this idea, we have Pocketcat's room in Rare's world inside the Golden Gates, which changes depending on who's the current host of Pocketcat. In the room of the previous Pocketcat, we find the room full of children's toys, giving dark implications. But if Daan takes over the role, we only find what seems to be a crime scene. Perhaps the deviant behavior of Daan, resulting from his childhood, manifested in something else entirely. Perhaps what he was battling was his urge to kill. If we take a closer look at the crime scene, we see that the victim appears to be a woman wearing high heels and fishnet ties. There is also a golden thread connecting the body to a chalk outline with blood on its left side. This could be totally a stretch, but what if this all is alluding to Jack the Ripper? He's famously known for removing the left kidney and uterus of one of his victims, And while I think the blood is too high to be where the uterus should be, it's just right where the left kidney is supposed to be. If this is true, then it could mean that the woman is actually a prostitute, and they are the victims of the new Pocketcat. In either case, Pocketcat is what Daan becomes once he no longer can fight his trauma and gives in to his darkest impulses. It is probably the darkest Moonscorch of all, and it's not even something to joke about. The reason why I think it's a Moonscorch is precisely because of how much it fits to Daan as a character. Sure, he might be only the temporary holder of the title of Pocketcat, but it doesn't change, it is a role befitting him, as unfortunate as it is. Instead of healing from his past, Daan no longer bears shame for the ugly way it made him deep inside. And for him, this is its own way of freedom. Samarie was a Dark Priest member of an exclusive group of children who were naturally gifted with the occult. She was sequestered by the Ninth Circle of Fiend Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City. The children were subject to a series of brutal rituals that would rot away their bodies, with the goal of attuning their spiritual energy to make connection with the old gods and receive their messages. These rituals have taken a significant toll in Samarie's body, which has decreased her lifespan by several years. And Samarie is deeply aware of this fact. During her time in the Vatican City, Samarie became infatuated with Marina, and this infatuation evolved into romantic obsession, and soon enough, Samarie was stalking Marina's every move. She even resorted to use magic to read her thoughts. By that point, Samarie knew everything about Marina, while Marina didn't even know about Samarie's existence. She learned about the letter, about Marina's father, and the plan to go to Prehevel. Samarie believed that the only way Marina could be happy would be with her father's death. So she followed Marina and traveled to Prehevel as well, in order to kill Father Domek, only to get herself involved as one of the contestants of Termina. Let me take one moment to explain the reason why I left Dysmorphia for last. Simply put, it is the Moonscorch we have the least information available to analyze, and it seems to be one full of symbolisms, as well as lore-related details. Not to mention, psychologically speaking, it might be the trickiest one of them all. So, since we don't have Samarie's background story in full, as she's not a playable character yet, this last analysis will be the one with the most speculation involved. Which means that if we eventually get Samarie as a playable character, I might have to go back to Dysmorphia again and see what I got right, what I got wrong, and what I failed to mention. So, let's begin with the name, Dysmorphia. The word dysmorphia literally means deformity or abnormality in the shape or size of a specific part of the body, but it's most commonly associated with the mental health condition known as body dysmorphic disorder, or BDD. The condition is defined by an overwhelming preoccupation with the perceived flaw in one's physical appearance. Usually, this flaw is only imaginary, but when an actual visible difference exists, its importance is disproportionately magnified in the mind of the individual. As you would expect, the concern for the perceived effect induces severe emotional distress. It can also make the individual prone to social isolation and occupational dysfunction. BDD is part of the obsessive-compulsive spectrum, or OCD, which is categorized by, amongst other things, intrusive thoughts, compulsion, which is defined as an irresistible urge to perform a certain action, and the intense fear for catastrophic outcomes, all traits that Samarie has demonstrated in the past. Samarie also shows some borderline personality disorder traits, which could explain her obsession with Marina, but I'm no psychiatrist, so I won't be saying anything for sure here. Listen, diagnosing fictional characters with mental issues can be fun and all, but it can be dangerous too, and I don't want to spread any misinformation here. This video isn't supposed to be professional advice, so take it with a grain of salt and seek specialists if you have any questions. I mentioned the PPG because to me it looks like it fits, but I won't be taking it further into the analysis of the Moonscorch, as it is not something directly implied, unlike the body dysmorphia that gives the transformation its name. Appearance-wise, Dysmorphia is the ugliest Moonscorch, at least in my opinion, which, considering the name and the disorder, could be interpreted as the way that Samarie perceives her own body. Actually, never mind, Monster is probably uglier, I just thought of it now. Anyway, sorry for getting sidetracked. Back to the script. I want to reiterate that this monstrous appearance could be interpreted as the way Samarie literally sees herself when she looks in the mirror. Her skin assumes a rough texture and decaying purple color. Her body proportions are all over the place, and most noticeably is her face that was peeled off and stretched into a rim that forms what seems to me a sun crown. Okay, give me 1 minute to halt the psychological analysis and do some lore theories here. We know Samarie has the radiating soul, which gives her some sort of connection with the sun god. But what really seals the deal for me is the fact that Dysmorphia only has one eye. If you have seen me talk about the sun god before, you will know the Eye of Enlightenment is a symbol heavily associated with him. So my speculation here is that the god that Samarie was being used to channel was the sun god, and that's why we have the connections in her design. Rayla, Olivia's sister, also has the radiating soul, and the rare world version of Logic also has the sun crown. What is Logic's connection to the sun god? I genuinely have no idea though, and speculating about this is a whole can of worms I don't want to open up. This is Mal the Duke's territory, not mine. Also, I know he's watching this, by the way. Hey Mal, what's up? Anyway, this Logic form could also be seen as Rayla's Moonscorch in many ways too, but it's probably not, and talking about Logic now would be way too much sidetracking. We also don't have enough information on Rayla to even do a psychological analysis, so let's leave it at that. Back to the psychology. Dysmorphia has a rather vivid dialogue that seems to contradict with everything we have discussed so far, and it's important that we make sense out of it to understand where this is coming from and how it ties with our analysis. When we fight Dysmorphia, the prompt keeps repeating that Dysmorphia is radiating before us. If we use the talk action to call her an abomination, she will be angry and ask us how dare of us to call her that, as she is absolutely radiating. If we ask her what she means by radiating, she says, like a moth, I'm finally close to bloom, a hairy moth in the night. So, if Dysmorphia is supposed to represent Samarie's insecurities, how come she is more confident than ever? That's a question that took me some time to wrap my head around, but I think I finally came up with a satisfying answer. Since Dysmorphia is the way Samarie sees herself, this ugly and self-conceited monster is how she thinks everyone sees her as. She thinks she's hateable, cringe, and obnoxious, a freak that pushes everyone away with her antics. So this is the irony behind the transformation. Samarie is a shy, socially inept girl that was tortured her entire life by evil priests. She doesn't know what it means to be friends with someone else or how human interactions work. Samarie is far from being unattractive, but in her eyes, she is a hideous monster. She is far from being a pushover, but she thinks everyone finds her obnoxious. She has a very low self-esteem, but somehow even the little she bears is considered too much for someone of her caliber. This is the reason behind the dissonance in Dysmorphia's dialogue. And lastly, what about the ghouls she summons? I believe they represent the other children of the ninth circle she carries in her psyche as a reminder of the horrors, the ones that probably didn't last as long as she did. So to wrap things up, I'll come clean and say it. I know I just listed all the reasons Samarie's crazy, but I think she's my favorite character in the Hunger Termina. Her story is filled with this immense tragedy, while she's very charismatic in her own quirky way. I'd say she's even more inclined to extroversion, despite her shyness, as it is indicated by her radiating soul. She did bad stuff, but that was the only way she knew how to make things right, and she never had anyone to teach her otherwise. Dysmorphia is the result of Samarie failing to love herself properly, to embrace who she is, to learn that under all that insecurity beats a golden heart that is beautiful in its own right, and that she's capable of all of those things without degenerating into a monster. It's unfortunate that her body won't last, even if she survives the festival, but maybe in some timeline she had just enough time to be understood and appreciated for who she is. Now that we are done with all the Moonscorches, I will reveal what's the special surprise I promised at the beginning of the video. Before that, though, I want to thank all of you for the support. Shadow the Axolotl has just reached 10,000 subs, and to me, that's an insane mark. I never expected this channel to receive this much attention, as it was mostly a hobby I wanted to give a shot at. But look at how far we have gone, and I have to thank all of you who have been here watching the videos, commenting, and interacting. I love those little moments we have down in the comment section. It gives me motivation to do better and make each video more exciting for you guys. So, once again, thank you so much, and be ready, cause there's a lot more to come. There will be more Fiend Hunger, yes, but I also want to try making videos about different games and to overthink them just the way I do here. So if you're new here or looking forward to more stuff like this, please consider subscribing as well. Very well, sorry for dragging this on, but I really needed to share those words. Okay, without further ado, here is the bonus, I promised. These are the references for the Moonscorch transformations that I could find, and I shall share with you now. Weeping Scope design was based on the manga series Judgement, and Levi's appearance was also based on the protagonist. I never read it myself, but I know it's from the same author as Blue Lock, which I enjoy quite a bit, so maybe I will check it in the future, who knows. Mechanical Dance was likely based on a song of same name by Luna C. I won't play it here because, you know, copyright, but feel free to search it for yourself. The creator of Fiend Hunger is known for enjoying his fair share of old Japanese metal. I'm not as deep into it as him, but I dig the song, so maybe you should try too. Mastermind was based off the Mumblers from Fiend Hunger, which themselves are inspired by the Mind Flayers from Demon Souls. And let me tell how much I hate these guys, oh my god. Valkyrie's appearance is based on the depiction of the witch Louhi from the painting The Defense of Sampo, illustrating a passage from the Finnish epic Kalevala. It was also sent as an entry for a contest of Elden Ring-inspired art hosted by Valkyrie. Originally, its name was Valitar. I say it's Valitar, I will go with Valitar. But later, it was repurposed to be Karin's Moonscorch. Crazy to think that transformation came first and the character later. I wonder if she's not the only one. Then we have Chaugnar, which the name was taken from Chaugnar Fallen, an eldritch being from the Cthulhu mythos. Cocoon's appearance was inspired by Anima from Final Fantasy X. I haven't played myself, so I can't say I know much about it, but there's that. If you guys know any connections to the transformation, you can leave it down below and enlighten all of us. And I think that's all of them. That's all the references I could get. Leave a like if you made this far into the video, and thank you for watching. I will see you next time.